Welcome to Redefining Engagement. I'm Francesca, Director of Audience Development and Strategy at Contribly. And in this show, I speak to leaders and innovators in the media industry so that we can bring tips, wisdom, ideas, and even some things to avoid so that we can all do more engagement better. So without further ado, let's move on to our next guest. Hi, Anugrah. How are you?
Hi, Francesca. I'm good. Thanks for having me over.
Thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to our chats. So how about we start off with a little introduction? Would you mind maybe introduce yourself, tell me a bit about your background and maybe a little introduction around Dot as well? That would be great.
Sure. So my name is Anugrah and I'm the founder of Dot, like you already mentioned. Dot is a baby company. It's just been 6 months into the journey. And Dot was born out of a very simple idea. We did not want news to be confusing, boring, misleading, and a whole lot of other awful things that it has become today. So we started with this simple idea that we'll start providing folks with one high quality explanation across a range of topics. It could be politics, the world, economy, business, science, tech, anything and everything as long as it is relevant to you. So yes, that is how we started out. And a bit about my background. To be honest, I have no background in journalism. I've never stepped my foot inside a newsroom. I have never studied journalism or mass communication, but I don't see that as a handicap. To be very honest, I kind of see that as my superpower because it forces Dot to think from the perspective of consumers because we don't know the perspective of newsmakers. So yes, that has been a short and sweet journey so far.
It's great that it is a fresh perspective. I can imagine a lot of journalists might have a little bit of an opposing view to that. But tell me a bit about how you saw news and why you've approached it differently. Like, what made you think that, oh, we really need to start something a bit new? And what is your background originally?
I'm an engineer by education. I studied computer science. I worked as a software developer for 3 years for Citrix. After that, I did my master's and I did an MBA. I studied business and then I worked at Boston Consulting Group as a management consultant for close to 3 years. And eventually I took this plunge into entrepreneurship. So none of it is directly linked to journalism, but I'm sure in bits and pieces, all of them have contributed in the way I approach a problem, the way I think about things.
You're definitely a consumer of news. So you saw some problems with the way that we were approaching it, I assume.
Yes. So there were two main problems, Francesca, that I saw. And I'm sure you see that in UK and elsewhere also. But amplify all that by 100 and you get the Indian news platforms. So the first problem that I saw was that the way things were explained, it did not really do a very good job at that. So when we talk about things like, I'll give you a small example. When we talk about Russia-Ukraine war or Israel-Palestine war, most folks, even really smart folks, my colleagues or batchmates, they wouldn't be able to place Israel on the map. They wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Israel and Iran and Iraq. We'll bundle all of them together. So when you start with a point where you do not have the background context and you are forced to read about something that goes into depth of these things, you feel at a loss. You feel so disconnected that the best option for you is to just shut it off and stick to news that is more comforting to you. You stick to masala news, the Bollywood gossips, the cricket conversations, right? Because it comes easier to you. I don't fault the consumers for not knowing. It is not their fault, right? You can't possibly know everything about everything. It is the responsibility of the newsmaker to educate us to the point where we understand what has happened and not just what is happening. So that was one very big gap that I identified that we wanted to fix. And the way we do it is by starting off with very simple, friendly background explainers about the topic at hand. We don't dump it down to the point where it starts losing the essence, but we try to bring everybody onto the same page before we start talking about the exact incident that has happened. And of course, we also try to go deeper and give insights. So for folks who are already experts in that domain, they still have something to take away from that story. So that is the first problem that we were trying to solve. The second problem, which is I think the bigger problem, is around the business model itself. And a lot of failings of media that we see today, things like clickbait, a lot of ads, propaganda, bias, right? All of that stems from a fundamental mismatch in what is right for the users and what is right for the news org. And the insight that I received is that when people who are consuming the news, that is you and me, when we are not the ones who are paying for news, then there is bound to be this mismatch that I mentioned. And so the person who consumes the news has to ultimately pay for the news. If the advertiser or sponsor pays on your behalf, the newsmaker will be incentivized to prioritize their interests over yours. So from day one, we were very clear that we have to get our users to pay for news. But I'm sure you are familiar with how big a challenge this is. People are not okay to pay for information because they feel that you can get it for free online. So one way for tackling this is a subscription model, which is very, very cheap. It is dirt cheap. It is 59 rupees per month, which is like half a dollar, half a US dollar. This is on top of a very generous 1 month free trial, because we are trying to change a very fundamental habit that users have, which is that we are not ready to pay for news. So we want to give them a value which is way more than what they are giving us in monetary terms for that deal to make sense for them.
I love this focus on users first. Who you obviously you are, in your words, a baby company. Tell me a little bit about your users and how you started and what kind of readers are coming to you.
So the users, they are typically people in tier 1, tier 2 cities, urban India, who obviously speak English and who have a bit of a purchasing power because they have to pay for subscription. Uh, there's an equal split between male and female, and we try to catch these folks right out of college. So many of them are still in college or they are early jobbers. Of course, there are exceptions. We have folks who are still in school, we have folks who are close to retirement, but bulk of our users are millennials, people like you and me. And the way we have been able to target them is primarily through LinkedIn. We started out on LinkedIn. Everything was organic. My partner Saloni, she has been a big help. She is mini influencer in her own right now. And then we spread through word of mouth. These folks, they were kind enough to spread the word and talk to their peers, their colleagues about it, and that is how we have been growing.
So you've got, yeah, go on, sorry.
We did try exploring other social media platforms like Instagram, but that hasn't worked very well for us for obvious reasons, because people usually go to social media for entertainment, and it's very difficult for us to compete with the content that is out there.
So you've got a really clear vision of what you want your brand to be. You have some, like, obviously paying users, and you really understand who they are. What do you consider audience engagement in your world? Because I'm guessing, since it's a different business model from brands who are already established, that might look a little bit different, or is it the same?
I mean, I'm assuming the other brands, they go by the bookish definition of audience engagement, which is basically trying to build a relationship between the two, in which you try to give something of value and then they pay you money for it, and then you extract the difference as profit. My definition is a bit different, and it is a bit more idealistic, but hear me out. I'll take some time to walk you through it. The ultimate goal of audience engagement for me is to make your audience an insider. Across the world and across products, the traditional or the bookish definition is that there is an artificial divide between the companies and the audience, right? And between the producers and the consumers, however you want to put it. And because of this artificial divide, the relationship between the two has become very transactional. Right? But there is one product which is, in my head, it is a very good example of good audience engagement. It is college education. Nobody talks of college education as a transactional deal. From the outside, of course, it seems like you paid them money and in return you got a degree. They gave you few lectures and exams, but nobody talks about it like that. At least in my case, I don't think of my college education as that. I think of myself as a part of the college. I still remain a part of that college, even though I've graduated many years back. So that is what I call as becoming an insider. And I don't think of my college as a company. I don't think of myself as a customer, even though a transaction did take place. Years later, I am a very strong advocate for my college, XLRI. Right? So even when I meet people, I will talk in glowing terms about the company, which is my college. I don't see myself as very different from the college. So this is the vision that I would like to see for Dot, and frankly for any company for that matter. Break down this artificial divide that you have and see consumers as an insider. For some companies, that insider could mean becoming a co-creator, asking them to start creating the product with you. Not in Dot's case. I mean, at least not at the moment. We don't see it taking that shape. But for us, it is more of a advocate thing. We would want people to become such strong advocates for Dot that they, in some ways, they feel that they are working for or working with Dot. They don't see themselves as just a paying user, a subscriber, or even a member, or even terms like being very loyal to the company, right? I don't like these corporate jargons because, sorry, I'm digressing, but even when we use the word loyal, there is an inherent power difference, right? You are being loyal to somebody who is, or something which is supposed to be at a higher pedestal.
My gosh. I love that as a definition. Yes, it is, big picture, very idealistic, but I had never thought about it that way. Like looking at it as education. I'm very proud of the schools and universities that I went to, and we very happily put them on our LinkedIn, and we very happily talk about them or even connect with other people because they've been to that same university or school. And yeah, that's fantastic. Very hard to measure that idea of advocacy, or do you have an idea of how you do that once people are part of your community?
So we don't directly measure advocacy, like you mentioned. It is something that is not easily quantifiable. It is more of a qualitative thing that you would see. But one way how we measure it is how quickly or how often do people give you feedback about your stuff, right? And especially good feedback. And this stems from my own personal experience of not being a very vocal supporter of things, even products that I love. It is very rare for me to go out there and tell the world, hey, I love this product, even though there are many platforms that I love. For example, Riverside is a lovely platform. I love using it. But I have never I've never gone on LinkedIn or on WhatsApp or anywhere. I've not talked about Riverside or Slack or any other product that you love. But the flip side is when you hate a product or when you dislike it or when you have had bad experience, you'll be a very vocal dissenter, or you'll start poking holes in that product very quickly. You'll rant about it online. That happens quite often. So one way, again, we're not measuring this, but when we see people advocating for Dot, going out on LinkedIn or elsewhere and saying that, hey, this is the best thing that I saw on the internet today. This is how my day starts. I believe in this news outlet because of the principles or whatever. I think it is a very, very strong signal for us to show that we are on the right track. So we are looking for folks who not just like our product, we're looking for folks who love us to the point that they become strong at.
And what kind of feedback have you had, and how are you receiving this feedback most of all from your readers?
So one way in which we get feedback is at the end of every story, we have a thumbs up, thumbs down button. And once you tap on it, it brings up a list of pre-filled tags. So for example, let's say you pressed on the thumbs down button. So the options that you see next are the story was too long, it was too short, it was biased, it was boring, right? Stuff like this. And then you can select one or more of those options and you can quickly send us your feedback. So this is one way in which we get feedback from them. For longer conversations, there is another button which takes you to a WhatsApp business account, and then you can start chatting with us. And like I've told you before, I know this solution will not scale well, but in our early days, it is just lovely to be so close to your customers. I know I can't do the same thing with a BBC article. I can't catch hold of the person who wrote it. I can't catch hold of the person who designed the website. I can't do that. But for Dot, you can directly talk to me. And at times, the feedback that I get, I reply so quickly that sometimes folks tell me, hey, am I chatting with a bot? Because they're so pleasantly surprised that the founder is there and he's actively engaging with you.
So yes, that is hard to scale.
Very hard to scale.
Very hard to scale. But for those initial advocates, that's such an important piece, isn't it? Because once you have that foundation, you can only find new ways, and your team will eventually grow, which means that could grow as well. Maybe hard to scale, but wow, love that. Sorry, did I cut you off?
No. Go on.
And what do you think at the moment are your biggest hurdles or challenges when you're trying to engage with your readers? What's stopping your news brand from engaging better, do you think?
I think when we started out, again, it will come across through this interview that I am very idealistic, as most journalists are prone to be.
Yeah.
So when I started out Dot, I had this notion in mind that if you build a solid product, people will flock to you. Like they say, build and they will come. Unfortunately, that does not translate very well in real life. People do come, but they might drop off. They might not be vocal supporters. They might not spread the word. Word of mouth will take you only so far. So that is one big lesson that I got very early on, that you need to be out there. And I mean, I almost saw advertisements as something which is very evil, but that opinion is changing very quickly. We have realized that organic growth is not very sustainable. So you need to be out there. I think my disagreement with ads is mostly that on social media it becomes a shouting game where you have to try to speak louder than the next person and you need to catch on to the latest trend and all that. So coming back to your question on engagement, I think the biggest lesson that we learned is there are few traditional things that you still have to do, irrespective of how uh, I don't know how different you might think you are. Those processes are in place for a reason, so you need to stick by them.
So yeah, that's a very engineer mentality. I obviously work in, like, we have a tech product, and it's very hard to get over that. If we build a solid product, people will come, because I think a lot of people do really believe that. And there's a bit of me that's like, also, it's about a solid vision and being really good at telling that story in the right format. So yeah, ads being evil is an interesting concept, but if you are using those tools to push that bigger vision in the right way and really explain like why you have value, then it's a bit of a different story, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Are there any other
on a
challenges?
yes, I'm just coming to the second challenge.
Mm.
Another lesson that I learned is, I mean, it is again going back to engagement being a very long drawn process. You won't get quick results. When you see success stories online, you are tempted to think that this is how things work in the real world. A good example for it is there are many folks who follow us on LinkedIn. They follow our page, they comment on our post, they like our post, but they are not users of Dot. They don't use our website, they don't use our app. And this is very baffling to me. I mean, it is truly surprising. If you love our product so much, why is it that our engagement is still restricted to social media? Why is it that you're not a user? I mean, I've learned this lesson that all engagement does not have to necessarily end up in them becoming a user of Dot and ultimately becoming a subscriber of Dot. There is still a lot of merit in them just being our followers on social media. That is a good enough win in itself. And because for them, maybe the content that we post on social media is sufficient enough value that they want from us at this moment. Maybe eventually they become users of Dot and paying users, or maybe they never. Totally okay. And in turn, we also derive value out of them. Even if they, let's say, they like a post, that post is spread within the network. So ultimately, it does help us too. And so another lesson that I learned is engagement is a very long drawn process, and we should not see it as black and white, right? So there are wins in the middle as well.
Yeah, it's a long funnel, and there's so many reasons, isn't there? I think finding those reasons as to why they're not trickling
I
down
don't like
is
the
the
way
hard.
it is described as a funnel, but yes.
Yeah, no, go on. How would you describe it?
It's more of a life cycle. When you describe it as a funnel, inherent meaning is that people start dropping down as they go lower. But when it is a life cycle, they will eventually come back. They might be somewhere in the middle. They might take a step back. They might come below. Right? So I don't like the way it is described as a funnel. I don't have a very good metaphor. Next time, maybe I have a better one and I'll get back to you.
No. I've had a few people say that. Someone mentioned it. I think it was Fabienne in one of her interviews. She called it dating. She was like, it's more like a dating app. Yeah, there are people who you date who you really like, and that you either become friends or connected. And there are some people that you will meet once and you might start, and then you might step back and, you might meet them again in the future. It's about relationships, isn't it? Versus that funnel kind of view. So I kind of agree
That's a
with you on the
wonderful
funnel
way of
bit.
looking at it. I'm going to steal that one.
It's so good. I'll send you the link, and I'll put the link in the chat as well.
Absolutely.
But let's talk a bit about strategies. What strategies have proven effective in engaging your audiences in your experience so far? You've mentioned the thumbs up and thumbs down, and I love that. And are there any others?
So we have started recently on something that we call campus partnership, and that has proven to be quite effective for us. Again, it is a very long drawn process. You won't get instant results. But if you look at the big picture, which is getting people to advocate for you, eventually becoming members, it has worked very well for us. So the idea is very simple. We have reached out to top colleges across India, and these are like engineering colleges, art colleges, management colleges, 20 odd colleges. And then we have told you, hey, we are giving you one free article every week, which would otherwise be paywalled, but for you it is exclusive, it is free of charge, and it is curated for you, right? Because those students are looking for things that will help them prepare for job interviews, higher education exams, stuff like that. So we pick out those stories and we tweak them in a way that makes most sense for them. And it is the full story. It is not a gimmick that we give them half the story and say, hey, for the entire story, switch to the Dot app, or nothing of that sort. It is very transparent. It is not transactional. It is something that is genuinely going to help them. And we hope that if they really like that one story, they'll come back to read the other stories on our app and website. So that is the gamble that we have taken here, and it has been surprisingly good. The feedback that we have got is these folks whom we hopefully see as our users maybe 4 or 5 years down the line, once they start earning, they would have brand awareness about Dot, and they would eventually become our users.
I love the fact that normally we're so used to broadcasting out and just hoping it sticks, and yet you're making sure that your content is completely relevant to the audience that you're targeting. That's such a great strategy. Are there any other things that you do that you feel that are really working for you, or even that you've heard from feedback of the way that you're doing stuff that's working?
This is like an anecdotal evidence that I'm giving you, but this is one of the feedbacks that I got. This was from a guy who was not happy with the way we had written a story. He called it too biased, and he said that we had missed out on many perspectives. And I had a very long chat with this fellow. Of course, I was trying to show him my point of view, that we have tried to cover everything and it is how things are. And it did not go down very well. And I truly felt that we have lost a customer. And cut to a month back, cut to after 2-3 months, this guy, he posts again, he messages me again for a different topic, and he tells me, hey, he started by saying, I know I'm a very difficult customer, I'm a very difficult man to please. He started saying this, and then he said, but this story that you have written, it was around the India-Pakistan situation. He told me that this is the best piece I've read across the internet. So I wanted to come back and tell you, I really love what you're doing. Again, it goes back to the thing that it does not matter whether they give you good feedback or bad feedback. The fact that they can give you feedback, they can directly reach out to you, and they can engage with you for a long duration of time is the main thing. It really does not matter if it was good feedback or bad feedback. The fact that you gave them a patient hearing, you accepted where you were wrong, or you tried to show them your point of view, that in itself is a very big sign of good engagement.
And I'm a big believer, obviously, with authorization, that kind of conversation is so authentic. Is that the kind of thing that you would share with others, or get others to engage in that conversation, asking him for permission? Or did you keep that as something very personal and as a sign that you're doing something right? What did you do with that feedback?
We actually share that with the world. We do this on a monthly basis. So every month I come up with a collage which kind of highlights Dot's journey through that month. And one section of that month end report is a collage of testimonials that we get, which is mostly good, sometimes bad, but we put that out to the world. And in one tiny way, it incentivizes people to reach out and share their views. And when they see other people talking about Dot, it is a tiny incentive for them. Hey, I also want to share my view, and maybe I'll get posted at the end of the month. So we are very happy to share that. And because that is a very authentic voice. Because I can keep on shouting at the top of my lungs about what Dot is doing right and what I feel is the right way to do journalism. But that will really not translate into users unless people hear from other people, not from the founder himself.
We always say we're in the job of telling the news or telling stories, and yet we're sometimes so bad at telling our own story. And it sounds like you've kind of got over that threshold, and you're doing a really good job with that. That's fantastic.
And that actually reminds me of a big gripe that I had with news media even before I started, is that they claim to explain the world. They claim to explain whatever is happening in the world, but they do a terrible job at explaining how they operate themselves. For example, terms of service and privacy policy. Most companies across the world, including journalism companies, they just have a very corporate tag in which they say something like, we protect your privacy, we take it very seriously, stuff like that, right? It is just a checkbox that they have to tick off. But they don't really go into the depth of explaining how they are doing it. So when we started Dot, I was very clear that from day one, we need to explain ourselves in a very easy and friendly way, even before we start explaining the world to people. And we started this by our own privacy policy and terms of service. So when you go to our terms of service page, you will see that it has very plain, simple English. It has bullet points, it has TLDRs, and that builds a lot of trust. Even if we don't advertise it, the moment somebody sees that person can start trusting a brand of journalism, because they feel that this person is being very transparent about how they operate, who funds them, who writes for them, how they will use my data, etc. I think that is a very big latent or implicit signal of building trust and engagement.
Do you have any other policies apart from your privacy policy, that you kind of like put out there to build that trust?
Not a policy as such, but it is sprinkled around our user experience. So let's say when you start by putting in your phone number to sign up, you will see that there is a small call out at the bottom, which explains why we need your phone number in the first place. And it goes on to explain that we do not store your phone number. We only use it to create a one-way hash, a code that we use to identify you, rather than using your phone number to identify you. Which means that even if we wanted to, we cannot spam your phone number, we cannot sell your phone number. There is no possibility of your phone getting lost in a data breach. So there are many tiny such small features that you will see across our app. You will see a reminder after you have scrolled through our stories. There's a tiny reminder which will tell you, hey, you are caught up with this week. Why not take a short break now? So things like this. Thank
That's
you.
fantastic.
Even when we have audio narration, so instead of reading, you can also listen to the stories. It is done by a human, right? So it has a very natural sounding voice. It has a natural Desi Indian accent to it. So these are things which make people feel like there is a human at the other side of the computer talking to you.
Can I
But
ask?
not saying that tech plays a very big role, but in the pursuit of growth and building a very shiny product, sometimes we lose the human touch and the human essence of things. And that is so important when you're telling stories, even in journalism.
Can I ask, why do you use phone numbers versus email to get people to register or for you to create the account? Why did you choose that?
It is because we give you a 1 month free trial, and it is very easy to create multiple email IDs. And by an extension, you can have 3 months after 3 months, which means you will never pay for our news. But people usually have just 1 or 2 phone numbers, so they'll exhaust it pretty quickly.
I heard there's a brand in the Nordics who also got everyone to sign up with their phone number. And they're like, no one has changed account because no one changed his phone number. And it was one of the smartest things that they did. And it was more accidental than planned, so I think that's genius.
It's actually a pretty common practice in India. People
Oh,
do sign
really?
up using the phone numbers. Yes. But unfortunately, that number is misused because the next day you start getting random calls from telemarketers, you start getting spam SMSs. So it's a mess.
Oh, I get that all the time as well. And I don't even know where they're getting my number from, but
Exactly.
yes, it's so
Because
annoying.
you do not bother reading the terms of service and privacy policy.
Well, that's potentially my fault too then. Yeah. Tell me more about metrics. So you mentioned earlier that you aren't necessarily measuring the advocacy, but what do you measure? Tell me a bit more.
So we do have analytics built into our products, which means we are exposed to a lot of out of the box metrics that you see, stuff like an average session length, what do people click on, stuff like so on and so on. But that is not necessarily something that I like to look at, because frankly those are big distractions in my head. They are just proxies. They don't tell you really what the user meant to do on your app, right? Those are proxies or just guessworks through which you build hypothesis around how the user actually used your platform. So for example, if it takes 5 minutes to read or listen to a story on Dot, but if a user spent 10 minutes on it, I don't know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. The user could have spent 10 minutes because either it was a very difficult topic for them to grasp, which means I did not do a good job at explaining things. They had to go back and they had to try to make sense of what I've written. Or it could mean that I had written it so well that they wanted to reread it, or they wanted to spend time and ponder over it. It could be either of it, or it could be something totally different. So those numbers do not really translate well into anything. If I've made that metric as my target, which is, let's say I want to keep on increasing the average session length, or I want to keep on increasing the clicks of a user, I will be forced to adopt many practices which are fairly not good. I'll start having clickbaity headlines. I will maybe start showing pop-ups or something of that sort, because my metrics have become my results. I very strongly feel that those metrics, rather than, they sure tell you a lot about your users, but they also reveal a lot about the company. What you track tells you about you as a company. What are you prioritizing? What are your ethics? What are your principles?
Yes.
I know it is a very loaded sentence that I just told you, but I'm a very strong advocate for not relying too much on metrics. Of course, we are a small company, so it works in our favor. But even then, I do not like getting caught up into the world of numbers and data. We have all of it. I'm not saying that we don't track it. I do look at things like return users and click-through rate and all those stuff. I do look at it. But for me, the single biggest metric that I really like to look at is, did this person love this story or not? Because that is what is called as a leading metric, because it is an indication of whether that person will come back to your platform the next day and the next day and the next day and eventually become your subscriber, versus what is called a lagging metric, something like looking at how many cancellations did you have today. Right? Of course, it tells you that the number of cancellations are going up, but it does not tell you why that cancellation happened in the first place. So by that time, it is too late for you to even course correct.
Yeah,
So
that's
I'm very
great.
cautious about not looking at vanity metrics or lagging metrics.
I think it's very similar with praise in different teams. Obviously, your team is smaller and you're approaching it differently, but we've talked a lot in the past in some of these sessions around what do you praise your team on? And if you're focusing on specific metrics, that's the thing that you're looking at, and they will only look at that. Whereas if you're praising your team on great engagement or great interaction with readers or amazing feedback they received, all of a sudden that's what they're aiming for more. So it sounds like you have like a very similar approach to the metrics. How do you talk about this with your team, and do you also make it transparent to your readers, this kind of way of seeing things, or is it quite internal?
It is transparent internally, so everybody in the team knows what we are tracking and they have all the numbers. But to be very honest with you, we have not yet exposed it to the world. But that is something that I really want to do. I think maybe that would happen at the end of the year when we come up with like an annual report of sorts. I know it is something that usually big organizations do, because they are in the public eye, they have to be answerable to their investors. But for Dot, I see that as maybe a biannual thing, or at least an annual thing, where we are very open about our numbers. Everything in terms of how did we earn, how much did we earn, what percentage of people paid us, which stories were well received, which were not, what kind of stories did well, how much time did people spend on reading a story, all sort of things. I really want to open that up to people, but that would not happen today. It would happen maybe 6 months from now.
I love that transparency. I really think that's the way that you lead with transparency and trust versus expecting people to trust you and them to share automatically. At what point in your whole process are you considering the reader in terms of like editorial content? Do you involve them before you publish, or is it very much you're getting feedback after? How are you deciding what you're publishing? I'm very curious as to the relationship with the reader in that editorial approach.
So, Francesca, in the ideal state, I would love to involve them in the editorial stage as well, because that is the larger goal of Dot. And it stems from a very simple insight that collectively the readers of Dot will know way more than what my team will know. It's a simple math thing. And especially because they will also be domain experts. Let's say we are talking about medical science or something. We will have doctors as our readers, but we'll not have doctors on the editorial team. So I really do want to involve them in the writing process also. But so far it hasn't happened because I don't know what is the best way to do it. It is a problem that I'm still grappling with, and the solution can also open up a lot of problems, because how do you start gatekeeping people by saying, hey, you are an expert, so you can be a part of our editorial process, but you are a commoner, you're not allowed to speak about this topic. Do you start gatekeeping? But then it is not a democratic process. I don't have the answer. I'm just throwing these questions out. And some might argue that democracy is not the right way to go about things. Many people do have this criticism of democracy as well, that voting should be an educated right. It should not be for everyone. I mean, I don't have strong views on it, but it opens up a lot of questions. If you start involving people, do you involve everyone or do you start gatekeeping them?
And at Dot, you very much about less content but more relevant, or less content but better content. How do you decide what content you are focusing on?
For now, it is truly a subjective choice. There is no secret sauce or algorithm or formula for it. I maintain a calendar in which I start putting in topics that are of relevance and are interesting, and then I wait for them to sufficiently ripen before I start talking about it. So let's say there's a developing story, but if I write about it today, there will be a lot of speculations because the thing hasn't really solidified at the moment. Maybe it will be better if I write about it after a couple of days. But then at the same time, I have to make sure that I do not wait for too long, that the story starts losing relevance and it becomes stale. So that is one metric, one way of tracking how we want to write stories. The second thing is trying to give users a diverse range of topics in a week. So the entire week just can't be about war or gloomy topics or just politics. You have to mix and match with optimistic stories, uplifting stories, stories about science and tech, a bit of business here as well. Again, that is a subjective call that I take.
It's a healthy diet worth of content in a sense.
Thank you for using the word diet, because this is one of my pet examples that I give, that I like to think of news as a well-rounded diet for your mind. Just as it is important for you to consume a little bit of everything, similarly, it is important for you to consume a little bit of all kinds of news. And then the onus lies on journalists to ensure that they prepare a very healthy preparation of that dish for you so that you start enjoying it.
The best kind of restaurateurs. I love it. The chefs of the news world in this case. And maybe let's talk a little bit about tech. Obviously, being from a dev background anyway, you probably have quite a lot of points of view on the things that are happening. What role do you see tech like AI, and obviously we mentioned measurements and data analytics, but how do you see that helping Dot in the future with your audience engagement efforts?
Because I come in from that industry and that background, of course, I have my biases. I really don't think of AI as an adversary. I very strongly think of it as an aid, but then it is an aid, right? So you have to use it with caution. It cannot replace you. You always need to have a human in the loop. Even for the story writing process or the researching process, there are limitations to AI in its current shape and form. It hallucinates and whatnot. Same goes for use of AI for audience engagement. I know Meta is trying to have this big vision where they want to automate things through and through. They want AI to determine for you how your ad should look like, what the copyright text should be like. They will be the ones determining the right audience for you, and so on and so forth. And frankly, that is how the future is going to be. But at the same time, there needs to be humans in the loop. It is unavoidable, and not because they will eat up our jobs and trying to save human jobs. That is not the point of it. It is simply because that human connection is required, especially for news making, journalism. You need that human touch at all points and all touch points of that life cycle. You need it, including audience engagement. So, of course, AI will help you generate very good creatives for advertisements. It can also tell you whom you want to target, what is the right time to target. It can create strategies for you. But at every step, there needs to be an oversight from humans to make sure that they're doing the right.
And, do you have any examples maybe of, I'm going to go into the not so positive, because I think learning from other people's mistakes is also great. Do you have any examples of a time where your engagement strategy or your efforts didn't go as planned, or that you were surprised by what you got back?
I think I will go back to the point that I initially made. The first lesson that I got is that if you think that you build something and people will come to you, that never happens. It was a very big lesson for me. So when you take that plunge into entrepreneurship, you start with that optimism that I'm going to change the world. At best, you're just going to make a tiny dent. That is the reality of it. So the biggest challenge for me is, how do I try to make that dent in the world without losing my mind, by still being honest to what I want to do.
I think that's the perfect definition of an entrepreneur, right? Like,
It is.
as a fellow entrepreneur, it's like, it's keeping the optimism and the vision whilst accepting every knock back as often as possible, and that not wavering what you want to achieve in the bigger picture.
Yes.
It's a great definition there.
It is. And to answer your question, Francesca, I think there's one more thing that I have realized quite recently, is that there's a very delicate balance that we have to maintain between user wants and user needs. What I mean by this is, one approach is to tell users, this is what you need, this is what I'm going to give you. This is a very paternalistic attitude in which I tell you what is good for you, and this is how news should be, how journalism should be. The other extreme is pandering to user wants, which is them telling you, hey, I want 30-second reels, which are very fun. I want 80-word digests, which are very snackable for me to consume. But you know at the back of your mind that this is not what journalism is meant to be. Because when you make things so snackable, you are hiding more than what you are revealing. And that is a very dangerous thing. So this is the delicate balance that you have to try to balance. You have to try to balance both ends. At one end, of course, when you start pandering to what people want, it is very easy to go that route because that gives you a lot of money. The other route is when, let's say, you are paternalistic and you feel you know what is best for the users. That is a very difficult road to tread on, because frankly, you will not find a lot of takers. So how do you balance between the two? It
Yeah.
is very much like you advising a child to go visit the dentist because their teeth are rotten versus you giving them more candy because it will make them happy. It is an
Yeah.
extreme example, but that is how it is.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about your team, because we talked loads about your users, which is obviously my favorite topic. But because you're approaching things a little bit differently, what kind of skills do you need at Dot to be able to do what you do? Is it different to what you'd expect, or what do you focus on within your team?
We look for people who are generalists, people who can do work across the spectrum rather than people who are specializing in one particular thing. Not that because they are not good people, but because at such a small scale, we can't afford to have too many specialists. So I look for people who are generalists and also folks whom I call 10x people, people who can get 10 times the output as what a regular folk would do. At least that is how I like to think of myself. I'm not patting my back, but I really do think of myself as somebody who's a generalist and a 10x person. So when I started out, it was just me. It still is a solopreneur endeavor mostly. So I built the apps and website by scratch. I am not a designer, and that shows in our design as well, but I learned a bit of user experience, a bit of designing, and then researching, doing the editing, doing the writing. Right? So in early days, we look for folks who are like this, and thankfully, we have found a few people like that who have the skills across the board and who also very, very strongly believe in Dot's vision. Very, very strongly. I mean, I would be happy to compromise on skills, but not on somebody who does not understand what Dot is doing.
So I think generalists are extremely underrated. I totally agree with you, but I cannot agree more on the vision piece. I think that's potentially almost the most important piece, isn't it? That's fascinating. Tell me a bit about what impact your engagement strategy has had on your business. Obviously, we've mentioned the whole metrics thing, but what has it achieved so far, and where do you see it going?
So the engagement piece is like the centerpiece of Dot's strategy. It is not even the content or the tech base that we have or marketing or anything. Everything that we are doing is for engagement. Rather, I would call it advocacy because engagement has a negative connotation today. So everything that we are doing is to get that advocacy, to find 100 people who, or thousands and thousands of people who genuinely love Dot so much that they will talk about it. That is like the central focus of what we are doing. In many ways, the metric that I said that we measure ties back to advocacy, to helping get those people be an insider of Dot. Frankly, that is how I look at it. So I do not think of engagement or marketing as a separate team. The good thing or the bad thing for a startup at this scale is that it's everything rolled into one, which means the marketing team is a part of the editorial team, which is a part of the customer experience team, which is a part of the tech team, which is a part of the user experience team. So everything is rolled into one, but then the central focus again remains, hey, is this decision in our design or is this feature in our tech stack actually helping people get closer to being advocates for Dot? If not, then we'll take a conscious call to not go that.
Fantastic group of generalists. That's what I can hear there, because you're all part of each other's team, and that's really special.
So,
I have one
Francesca,
last,
just
yeah.
one point very quickly that I wanted to mention is since we talked about folks who really believe in the vision. So one of the first hires that we made was a guy who wrote in with an email subject which just said, "Dot is changing the world, and I want to be a part of it."
I love that.
Oh, I got goosebumps the moment I read that mail. It was truly a beautiful note that that person wrote. It was truly heartfelt. And of course, that guy is working with us full time now. So going back to the point about building a team, of course, we are looking for people who are very, very skilled, analyst, top-notch quality folks. But we are looking for folks who really understand why you're doing this.
Yeah.
And it is not because you can extract more work out of them, which you can, but that is not the end goal of it. The end goal is that even when there is no oversight, when you are not supervising them, they know what the right thing to do is.
Totally. One last question for you. Do you have an engagement hack for me? Something that you would say to others that they should start doing on their journey, even if they're halfway through their 50-year brand, or if they were starting out today, what would one thing be?
I am not fully qualified to give out hacks or gyan at this point. I mean, as idealistic as it sounds, again, I would say that there are no hacks. The trick is that there is no trick. There are no shortcuts. What I will not say is that the generic mantra that you usually get, stuff like be close to your customer, think like your customer. No, the simple hack is be your customer. Bring down that wall between the customer and the company.
Love it. Absolutely
In a
fantastic.
truly spiritual or metaphysical way, you would say that there is no customer, or the customer is one with you.
Oh, I love a bit of spirituality at the end of the session. Thank you so much for all of your insights. I've genuinely loved this interview. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Francesca. I had a great time.
I'll speak to you soon.